Let's cross live now to our correspondent in Ukraine, Cyril Ramaphosa, for the latest. Cyril, just tell us exactly where you are as we speak, and perhaps if you can just give us more detail on the events that unfolded not so long ago.
That's right. We heard explosions here in the capital, Kyiv, and we don't know all of the full details, but here's what we know. I'm standing near Maidan. It's right behind me. This is the city center, which has been so far protected from missile strikes and cruise missiles. But tonight, when the UN Secretary General António Guterres was meeting with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, we heard missile strikes, or we heard strikes in the city center of Ukraine. Here's what the mayor of Kyiv said, that hitting the lower floors of a residential building, rescuers and medics are working now, and that so far 3 victims have been hospitalized. So we know that this strike occurred in a residential area here in Kyiv, in the city center, not far from where I'm standing, while the UN Secretary General was meeting here in Kyiv with the President of Ukraine.
So just share your experiences with us, Sergio. How far away were you? What did you feel? You know, we just want to get a sense of just how impactful those strikes were.
Yeah, so, here in the city center, explosions are not, you sometimes hear them when there are strikes on the outskirts, especially when I came here about a month ago. You heard them more on the outskirts. It's been quiet since the Russian withdrawal in the northern region here. We do hear air raid sirens every day. We heard them today. But when these strikes occurred, these loud explosions here in the capital, there was no air raid sirens. That added a bit of fear here in the capital that an attack can occur without the notification of an air raid siren. So while in other parts of the country, air strikes, artillery strikes are much more common, especially in the east, here in the capital, there's been a kind of a lulling of a sense of normalcy tonight was just shattered, especially when the UN Secretary General is here visiting with the President of Ukraine. To have missile strikes in the city center on a residential building is just shocking.
It is quite interesting, given the fact that he was in Moscow just a day or two ago having discussions with the Russian foreign minister about the war and efforts to try and bring about at least an end to shelling where civilians are. Tell us a little bit more about Chervenkovsky district. Is it still populated by civilians? Just give us a sense of the potential for casualties were it not for the numbers that you gave us earlier on.
That's right. So, right now, all we know is what the mayor of Kyiv is saying, which is at least 3 victims have been hospitalized. We'll know more numbers as the night goes on. So I can't give you any more information than what we know right now, which is 3 at least hospitalized. But, the city center is a very dense area. It's very populated. This is, lots of people were walking around today, especially around government buildings. There was, this is not a rural area. This is a very metropolitan city here. I just want to stress that what the UN Secretary General was visiting today was the suburbs of Kyiv, where there were occupations, where we saw mass graves, and so coming back into this to the city to visit with the president and to have strikes against a residential area, I think sends a strong message that a sense of terror, that to strike a residential area in Kyiv in the middle of the night is quite shocking. And I think that if that message was intended, I think it was delivered. And so here in Kyiv, we're waiting to see what happens for the rest of the night. But tonight, we know that at least 3 have been injured.
Has there been any reaction yet from the Office of the UN Secretary General, reaction to these strikes, and President Zelensky himself? What has been the outcry from him?
That's right. We were just getting news of their meeting, the conclusion of their meeting, of what they were talking about. A lot of discussions around Mariupol. But as that news was unfolding, as what we were learning about the conversations they had towards peace, we had these explosions, and now obviously the Ukrainian officials are getting out information as they're learning it. And so it is interesting that at the moment, that we start learning about the details of this meeting, we hear explosions here in the capital.
All right, so just, Sergio, the little that you were able to learn about the behind closed doors talks, as you said, you were just getting the initial information about that meeting. What were you able to learn? And I know sometimes it takes time for this information to trickle down to reporters, but just share with us what little you may have heard.
That's right. So the Ukrainian officials are hopeful that a successful evacuation of Mariupol, of specifically the steel plant, can happen, and they're relying on the UN. The President Zelensky says he wants to evacuate people from Mariupol, and we should be very clear for the kind of for everyone at home to get the context of what's going on in that steel plant. For the last week, we've had failed attempt to evacuate people from the steel plant, and Ukrainian officials have articulated that when they try to do this, the Russian armed forces either fire at civilians or set up their own corridors that they are afraid may lead into Russia. And so I think President Zelensky, saying that he's hopeful the UN could establish a humanitarian corridor is a real step, because the previous ones between the two nations, Russia and Ukraine, have failed. And so this is a real development. But that came just before the explosions, and so we'll have to see as the night goes on, if anything changes.
And I ask this, Sergio, this next question, also being mindful of the fact that sometimes it takes a while for the warring parties to proffer official statements on their operations, but has there been any word from Russia about these strikes in Kyiv?
I right now we don't have any word from Russian officials about these strikes in Kyiv. But what we do know are we know explosions occurred not too far from where I'm standing, and we know Ukrainian officials have said that 3 have been taken to the hospital. And this is the best information we have at this moment. Again, these explosions just occurred not too long ago.
All right, just a quick sweep of what your time there has been like over the past couple of weeks. The conditions under which you're working in order to be able to bring us the latest reports on the situation on the ground.
Well, it's changing. I mean, I've been here a month, and so when I got into Kyiv, it was being shelled pretty heavily as the Russians were preparing a withdrawal. I've been in Bucha, where I saw mass graves. When I went into Bucha, it was just as it was liberated, and every couple blocks you walked, you could see a dead civilian on the floor. Investigators hadn't even got to everyone yet. I saw some grim signs. I saw a man blindfolded and shot, and what appears to be a gun in his mouth, signs of execution. I've also been up in Cherniv, which the city of Cherniv, 70% of that city was destroyed. And I've talked to people who were interrogated, tortured. I've talked to a man whose brothers were executed and thrown into a mass grave. So grim, really horrific signs in these occupied areas. Kyiv itself has managed to, stave off the Russian invasion. Now they've left this area. However, we should be very clear, since then, Russian armed forces have continued to launch missiles into what are deemed, peaceful cities like Lviv and Kyiv, shattering the image that anywhere is safe.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Sergio. Sergio Olmos is our correspondent in Kyiv in the Ukraine.